Coming up on this episode, the Warriors continue their momentum out of the All-Star break with back-to-back wins. I'll have the major takeaways from the victories over the Los Angeles Lakers and Charlotte Hornets, plus a look at Steve Kerr's contract extension that ties him to the franchise until at least the end of the 2025-26 season. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. About to go 6:30 p.m. my time here in Australia, so I'm going to probably get this episode out first thing tomorrow morning. For those of you in America, I thought I'd pump it out now rather than tomorrow, given it's actually my birthday tomorrow and I kind of want to chill out a little bit. But right now, my eyes, they are legitimately quite sore, quite itchy. I feel like that's because it's been quite a hot day here today, probably nearing 30 degrees Celsius, and I put some sunscreen on earlier, and I probably got some sunscreen in my eyes. The other factor might have been watching that first half between the Warriors and Hornets, because that was ugly, a very tough watch, and I mean, some people on social media labeling it potentially the worst half of NBA basketball they've ever seen. Maybe a little bit over the top there, but it wasn't great. Let's be honest, it wasn't great. The Warriors led 43-29 at halftime. I mean, 43 points in the first half was the equal season low for Golden State, and yet they led by 14 at halftime. The Hornets had 12 turnovers and shot 25% in the first half. Warriors had 15 turnovers, I think, in the first half themselves. As ugly as that first half was, you take a 14-point lead, and really the Warriors were never truly threatened again, which was quite similar to the night before against the Lakers, where they ended the first half on a 17-5 run, got up 11 after being down 1 at halftime, and then was never really truly threatened over the second half. So just what you want out of the All-Star break, 2 comfortable wins to get back going here. It means the Warriors are 9-2 now in their last 11 games. Clearly in their best stretch of the season, should probably be 11-0 in their last 11 games, given they had that overtime loss against Atlanta and then that Clippers loss where they were up 15 in the second half. So playing very well at the moment, some huge positives to take forward, certainly some question marks moving forward as well. But yeah, as ugly as it was, that game, at the end of the day, you're just looking to stack up wins when you're still 10th in the Western Conference, trying to rise up the standings. It's all about the W's at the end of the day, and that's what the Warriors, went into Friday night's game wanting to do, and that's what they came out resulting in. And obviously doing the same against the Lakers. So good for fans to be able to enjoy a couple of comfortable victories without having to stress too much with more clutch time minutes, where the Warriors have obviously struggled this season. So bad was that first half that the Warriors had more rebounds, 31, than the Hornets did points, 29. As I said before, very, very tough watch. But again, you go there for a win, and the win is all that matters ultimately, and that's what the Warriors came out with. I thought, pay credit to the defensive intensity of both teams throughout the game. I mean, both teams got going a little bit in the second half, but it was still, the highlights were few and far between from an offensive standpoint. Steph led the Warriors with 15. No one else had more. There were 5 in double figures. I think Wiggs got to 14. Clay got to 13. Pods, I think, got to 13 as well. And GP2, he might have had 13 too. So they were the 5 in double figures, but it was obviously a defensive-minded game. But as good as the defense was, some of the wide-open missed threes that both teams just missed was pretty deplorable. And then the turnover issues as well, where both teams, Charlotte have been really good at not turning the ball over. They entered this game on the back of a 4-game winning streak. And Golden State, through this run, obviously entering 8-2 record up in their last 10 games, have been pretty good at not turning the ball over as well. And I don't know, it was like going and watch a local game, between 40, 50-year-old men in that first half, with some of the shot, lack of shot making, I should say, and just turning the ball over willy-nilly it was rough. But again, the Warriors come out with a victory. That's all that's needed. And they are playing the best basketball of their season right now. Things are looking up, given what they've done in the last 11 games, given a reasonable schedule ahead over the remainder of the season, and given the fact that they've basically got a full roster to pick from availability-wise here, aside from Chris Paul, who I'll get into shortly. He's about to return. He's back to 5-on-5 scrimmaging Warriors play the Nuggets on Sunday and then head off for a 4-game road trip where CP3 is expected to return. But I'll speak about that more so in a minute. Let's get on to some takeaways from this back-to-back coming out of the All-Star break with a 128-110 victory over the Lakers, and then that 97-84 low-scoring game against the Hornets, which was a scoreline that kind of is one of past decades, back to 80s, 90s basketball with the more physical defensive style of play. Just on a side note, I actually went to a chat, I suppose. It's called the No Bull Tour, that was in my home state last night, Friday night for me. And it was with Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant and Luke Longley. So went along to that. Went for a couple of hours. It was quite enjoyable. It was basically supposed to be a pub chat. There was no recording, photo or video whatsoever for the whole night, so you couldn't record anything that the guys were saying. But some interesting stuff was definitely spoken, and it was fantastic insight into their careers, obviously, and following on from the Last Dance documentary. If you've got any questions about that, if you want to know anything that Scotty or Luke or Horace might have said, then you can maybe comment on YouTube, or you can leave me a post on Twitter, either or. But that's just jump into that as a side note. But positives from these couple of games, back onto it. I want to start with Andrew Wiggins, right? And I want to give him some credit, and I want to give the Warriors as a franchise some credit for how they, first of all, Wiggins himself, the way he's played over these last 7, 8, even more, like 15 games. But going back to the Warriors' decision at the trade deadline not to move Wiggs, when they could have easily just cut ties and moved on from him, and they ultimately chose to hold firm, not to do that. And I thought at that time it was the right decision, because I simply thought that whatever you get in return for Wiggs is not going to be of the value that he could provide for you moving forward. And that doesn't mean him necessarily getting back to being the second best player on a championship team or getting back to an all-star level player. I just mean him being, a two-way consistent presence every night. And I think that's what we've seen from him since the trade deadline and even before that. And so you look at his last 5 games here, 17 points, 10 points, 19 points, and then the last 2 here in the back-to-back, 20 points on 8 of 14 shooting against the Lakers, and another 14 on 5 of 8 shooting here against the Hornets, which 14 points is nothing spectacular, but on a night where both teams struggle mightily offensively, to shoot 5 of 8 from the floor is actually pretty impressive. So this is a really great sign of just consistent, productive Wiggs. There's no scoring explosion by any means. I mean, you look at his last 8 games here, 7 of which have come after the deadline, and that one the day before the deadline against Philly, where he played really well. If you look at these last 8 games, 15.5 points, 4.9 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 0.9 turnovers. And that's actually, again, that doesn't necessarily stand off the page to anyone who's not a Warrior fan necessarily. But 2.4 assists, 0.9 turnovers per game in the last 8. For most of the season, Andrew Wiggins has committed more turnovers than he's... Sorry, there's flies going on in here. He's committed more turnovers than he's dished out dimes this season for the majority. And he's only just got it back over a 1-to-1 ratio where he's got more assists than turnovers. And that's come from the last 8 games. And I think that's kind of emphasizing his recent play of being much more confident, much more assured with what he's doing, whether it's catching and passing, catching and going, trying to get to the rim, catch and shooting, whatever it may be. He just looks so much more confident, looks so much more assured. He's being so much more aggressive with what he's doing. And I think regardless of the points, the rebounds, the defensive stuff, whatever it is, the fact that assist to turnover ratio is so much better, I think is really emphasizing what he's been doing recently. 1.4 steals per game as well, and then shooting 53.8% from the floor, 50% from three-point range, and 76.9% from the free throw line, which, again, kind of goes under the radar because for so much of this season, and not just this season, but a lot of Wiggs' Warrior tenure, it's like he gets fouled, goes to the free throw line, and it's an absolute lottery. Like, are you going to get 1 out of 2? Hopefully. That's almost what you hope for. You hope for 1 out of 2. And so the fact that he's being much more consistent and better from the free throw line is actually a big positive, because I think early in the season it might have actually impacted his aggressiveness going to the rim in a way that, obviously, as an Australian watching Ben Simmons in the limited time he's played in the last couple of years, I think his free throw shooting woes have clearly impacted his ability to try and get to the rim and finish. So I think that kind of haunted Wiggs a little bit earlier in the season, and so it's great that he's back to being aggressive. Wiggs, if he gets fouled, he goes to the free throw line. He's knocking down over 3 out of every 4 at the moment, which is fantastic. So credit to him. He's back playing a winning style of basketball, which is obviously the most important thing. Playing defense, which is probably an even greater responsibility for him right now than necessarily the offensive stuff is. So that's culminating in a plus 60 total plus minus here over the last 8 games, which is such a far cry from where he was early in the season, where I think he was over minus 100 at some point. Like, he was such a net negative for most of the season up until, a couple of weeks before the All-Star break maybe. And for him to turn it around like he has, full credit to him. And he was kind of the first player I really wanted to mention here over, the Warriors' last 11 games. It's, as I said, it's nothing super explosive from a scoring output. It's just, what you're going to get from him on a nightly basis. And that's, just what the Warriors need. They don't need Wiggs to go out and score 20 plus every game. It's not what they need from him. They need him to be able to contribute in a variety of ways. And I think he's doing that really well at the moment. Another player, I suppose, in the similar Wiggs mold that I wanted to speak about, that we've spoken about so much, and that's Jonathan Kuminga. And I really wanted to, this is a big question to you guys. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below, because I really want to know your thoughts on his game over these last few games. Obviously, the back-to-back here after the All-Star break, but even a couple of games before, where his scoring has taken a bit of a dip. And I think this was always going to come. Like, he wasn't necessarily going to continue to score 20 plus every game. I think defenses are starting to hone in on him a lot more, obviously, and allowing him to either take wide open threes, or if he does drive, loading up bodies at him and making him a passer, which I think to his credit, he's actually done a really good job of kind of adapting to that. And so you look at some of his assist numbers over these last few games. He has 6 today against the Hornets. He only had 6 points tonight, which was his first single-digit scoring game in, I don't even know, it was over 30 games. Might have been close to 35 games of double-digit scoring in a row, which unfortunately came to an end. But 6 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists. As I said, he's had 19 assists over his last 4 games, so nearly 5 a game. And I think he's doing a really good job of making the right decision, not trying to necessarily force things too much, making the right play. And so it's why I'm asking you guys what you make of his play recently, because yes, the scoring has gone down, but the Warriors are still winning, and I think he's still contributing and impacting games in a positive way. I think Steve's been happy with the way he's been playing. There's been a couple of times where he's pulled him late in games for offensive possessions or whatever else. But I think overall, the team is still happy with how he's playing. I think his defense has risen a little bit here over the last few games as well. I think he had 2 steals, 3 blocks here against the Hornets. So he's still contributing to winning basketball. And while he's still doing that, he's still obviously going to be a starter. He's still going to be playing 28, 30 plus minutes a game. But again, just wondering what you guys make of his recent play, because yes, the scoring has gone down, but I've actually liked some of the other stuff in terms of the playmaking specifically that he's been doing over recent games. I wrote an article earlier in the week just about Pods' introduction into the starting lineup, and I actually spoke about it a bit on last podcast as well, and how that may impact JK, just with the fact that obviously not having Clay out there, opposition defenses are going to be so much more willing to come off Pods to help defend JK at the rim than if Clay is out there. And doesn't matter what Clay is shooting in that particular game, if he's 1 of 10, not 9 of 10, doesn't matter what he's shooting. Defenses are still going to respect Clay's 3-point shooting, and they are going to be much more willing to come off Pods than Clay. And that's why I think it's something to watch moving forward. I wrote that before the All-Star, during the All-Star break, before this back-to-back, and just about the amount of field goal attempts that JK is taking now with Pods in the starting lineup. It's clearly been down here over the last 3 games since Pods entered. And I'm not saying it's a trend right now because it's only been 3 games, but I just think it's worth monitoring how opposition defenses guard JK with pods out there rather than Clay. And obviously those two, like Clay and JK, are still going to play a fair portion together. But I've also been interested in the fact that JK's minutes have kind of married a lot up to Steph in these last couple of games. Like instead of coming out at the 5-6 minute mark of the first quarter, he's kind of coming out at the 3-4 minute mark, kind of similar to Steph, which I'm a little bit surprised with because I was under the impression that like the second unit was just like in the non-Steph minutes, that was just JK's unit and that was his time to go and score. And then you've obviously got Clay playing off him kind of thing and impacting there as well. So I'm a little bit surprised that Steve's gone away from that and Steve's gone to more of, okay, I want Steph and JK playing as much together as I can. And then hoping that, Clay and Pods and the light and CP3 when he comes back, obviously can, carry that second unit. So I don't know, just fascinating. And I wanted to know your thoughts on, one, that rotation decision with JK and Steph playing a lot more together. And two, just JK's game generally and whether or not you think Pods' introduction to the starting lineup has impacted him at all. But again, the scoring's taken a dive, but he's still contributing in a number of ways. Clay coming off the bench, obviously worth a review here now that we've had this back-to-back following his season-high 35 against the Jazz before the All-Star break. So, rough shooting night against the Lakers on Thursday, 3 points. And then, okay game here against the Hornets, 13 points. Obviously, a little bit better scoring-wise. But I think overall, from a Warriors standpoint, the kind of position of being, playing really well and being in your best stretch of the season, I think it's signified somewhat by the fact that all your players are kind of contributing in a way every game rather than being completely locked to their number one attribute. So what I mean by that is Clay obviously has a horrible night shooting the ball yesterday against the Lakers. He was 1 of 9, I think, from the floor. And yet I actually thought it was an okay Clay game. And so many games, like almost every game this season, Clay shoots 1 of 9 for 3 points. You're like, that's an ugly, horrible Clay game. And for most of it, he's probably contributed to the Warriors losing. But I actually think he contributed to the Warriors winning yesterday against the Lakers with his ability to find Trace relentlessly. Those guys have got a connection, which is, it's a kind of connection. I know Clay's had a connection with Draymond and Steph for his whole career, but in terms of him as a passer and as a playmaker, I don't recall Clay ever being as willing to pass the ball to a teammate than he is with Trace. And I tweeted out earlier today, I tweeted that Clay has the 6th most assists on the team, or averages the 6th most assists on the team this season. And yet, he has assisted on 19 Trace Jackson Davis baskets, which is the most of any Warrior. I think Steph's second with 16. And so it's those guys have got a chemistry that is starting to work. It was less evident against the Hornets today, which is just the way the game went offensively, I think. But those two guys are certainly developing something. I wrote about it. And I think it's a factor that is going to be hard for opposition defenses, particularly opposition bench units, to try and guard moving forward when you're going to have Clay with his shooting threat and then TJD on the roll where guys, I've said it before, like guys want to throw two bodies at Clay coming off pin downs and stuff like that. They are still so scared of his shooting threat that they will do that and allow TJD to roll to the basket, and he obviously provides that capacity in a way that Loon and Dario Saric don't. So I think the fact that Clay can go out there, have a horrible shooting game and still impact the game positively is kind of signifying what the Warriors are doing right now, where everyone is able to contribute in one way or another, even if their top attribute isn't necessarily, Clay shooting. Doesn't have to necessarily be absolutely firing on all cylinders for him to be able to impact. Same with JK. Like JK is a scorer first and foremost, and yet he is impacting games in one way or another in a multitude of ways. And, Wiggs is the same, right? Like we're not, over these last 7, 8, 9, 10 games, whatever it may be, we're not getting these absolute woeful Wiggs games where he's like 5 points on 2 of 9 shooting, no rebounding, 4 turnovers and 1 assist. Like, these are numbers that he was putting up earlier in the season, and you just didn't know what you were going to get from Wiggs on a nightly basis. Now you kind of know what you're going to get, right? Even if the shooting isn't necessarily there, you're going to get the elite perimeter defense. You're going to get a few boards. You're going to get him making the right decision offensively rather than, turning the ball over more than he's, getting assists kind of thing. So that's kind of just, as I said, signifying the way the Warriors are playing at the moment, where players are contributing in a multitude of ways. More on a negative point, I suppose. I'm still concerned here about, as good as TJD was against the Lakers, and he played another 15 minutes tonight against the Hornets, I'm still worried about the whole Looney, Jackson, Davis, Saric conundrum. Now, on a positive, it seems like Steve has completely dismissed the idea of Saric playing as a small ball 5. I think he played some minutes today in the second quarter with Draymond, which I'm okay with because, Draymond's your starting center, so you can argue that Draymond is the center in that lineup with Saric at the 4. So I like that he's kind of dismissed that idea because it was just becoming a nightmare having Dario at the 5 trying to be the anchor of your defense on the interior. I kept telling mates, I'm pretty sure I could dribble into Dario Saric to score over him. That's how bad it was starting to become. So I'm glad that Steve's gone away from that. He's kind of pairing Dario and Trace together, which is good. But you're still getting these kind of loon minutes earlier in each half, which I said before the All-Star break, I don't know how you can have 3 guys like that, 3 bigs, you kind of say, playing anywhere between 8 and 15 minutes each per game. You're just not going to do that in the playoffs. You're just not. You're not going to have 3 guys coming off the bench who all kind of play a similar position playing 8 to 15 minutes. It's just, Steve's not going to do that. And so really, ultimately, right now, you need to be playing playoff basketball. 1, because you need to make the playoffs altogether. You're still 10th in the Western Conference. But 2, you want to prepare yourself as if you're going to make the playoffs. And if they do end up making it, you're just not going to do that. And so what do you do? And it's hard for Steve. It's hard. I'm going to get into it more when I talk about his contract extension in a minute. But, Dario is still a rotation level player in the NBA. Kevon Looney is still a rotation level player in the NBA. Those guys deserve to play, but so does Trace. And we saw what he was able to do, 17 points, 5 rebounds in less than 15 minutes on his birthday yesterday. Not as great today, obviously. I think he only had 2 points. I think he might have had 8 rebounds still, though. He impacts the game in a multitude of ways, which I think needs to be utilized more moving forward. And I don't know if there's it seems like Steve's been willing to adapt to a lot of things this season. Completely removing Kevon from the rotation and just giving him DMPs is not something he's quite gone to yet. And I've called for it a little bit here over recent weeks, but he's yet to go to that. And I just wonder if it's a point we move to before the end of the season. I don't know, because, Steve loves him. Steve loves Loon, and rightly so too, for the way he's impacted this team over recent seasons. Absolutely, I get it. But at some point, you might have to move. It took a while for Clay to move back to the bench. It took him a while to reach that point. Maybe, it'll take a while for him to get to a position where he's willing to give Loon DNPs, because he's also obviously got this historical record of 200-plus games played in a row, which you get a DNP, and that just ruins it. So I don't know. I don't know how much that plays into it. It shouldn't play into it at all, if I'm brutally honest. It should not play into it at all. But I think it might. I think you've got a guy who's played 250 games in a row. Do you really want to say, yeah, mate, I know you've played that many games in a row, you're just not playing tonight? You don't really want to do that. So I think it actually does play into it as much as I think it shouldn't. As much as you've got the kind of Loon, TJD, Saric combination, you've also got the GP2 Moody combo. So Moody plays the GP2 minutes yesterday against the Lakers because he was out with illness. GP2 back. Played really well against the Hornets. And he's played really well for the last 5 or 6 games he's been back. Been really impactful. And I think should definitely be getting minutes over Moody. But Moses, doesn't play at all and then randomly comes in the fourth quarter. Steve went 12 deep in the rotation here against the Hornets. And I don't know if that's got to do with the opposition. I don't know if that's got to do with just the state of the game and the fact the Warriors had nothing going offensively, so he was just trying different combinations and whatever else. But I just thought it a bit random that Moses just came out and played 8 minutes in the fourth quarter. And when early in the fourth quarter, when the game was in hand a little bit, but Steph still had to play a little bit in the fourth. I just find it a bit random. I just think, and I wrote about it the other day. There's a decision that had to be made here, and I think it should have been made before the trade deadline. I'll stick on this fence that Moses should have been traded before the deadline for his own good more than the franchise. But having not done that, I think there's a situation where, and I know it's difficult. I understand that. But you either bench the guy completely and just say, yeah, look, you're going to get DMPs, and come the off-season, we will try and find a new home for you. And just say that and be open and upfront and honest. That's not going to happen necessarily, but the alternative should be, all right, let's just give this guy 15 minutes a game for the next 10 games, see what happens. Because you saw before that the calf strain he had back-to-back 21-point games. Yes, they were in blowout losses, but there was something there, and it looked like he might be able to get a spot in the rotation, and then unfortunately the injury happens. It is what it is, but there should be one or the other. I don't think it's fair to anyone. I don't think it's fair to Moses. I don't think it's fair to Steve. I don't think it's fair to the team in general. When you have a guy who doesn't play and then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, it's like, yeah, come on for a few minutes. Like, it's not garbage minutes either. Like, it's just really random fourth quarter minutes where, like, he still needs to play well because the game's still on the line a bit, but you're not really providing him the opportunity to go out there and impact the game in a meaningful way that's going to push himself back into the rotation. I don't know. I don't really like it. I don't really like it, but at the same time, what are you going to do? If I was Steve, if I was the front office, I'd just genuinely sit him down and be like, you deserve to play, but we cannot play you. We will put our hand up and say we probably should have traded you at the deadline. And you know what? You're probably not going to play at all for the rest of the season, aside from garbage minutes. And we're just going to trade you in the offseason. And just the team's not going to do that. We know that's not going to happen, but that's just what I would do personally, because I think it's unfair on everyone involved with how they're kind of handling it at the moment. And it's actually kind of gone away a little bit, because when you're winning, these kind of issues kind of disappear. Like, it's an issue, yes, but who cares because you're winning, so it doesn't really matter. And because Kuminga's now in the starting lineup, because Pods is in the starting lineup, TJD is kind of playing a little bit more now again over the last couple of games. Because those other young guys are playing, the whole Moses situation is kind of fed to the back of the mind a little bit. But I still think it's an issue that's worth being discussed. And again, I'm disappointed for his sake that he wasn't traded before the deadline. Let's talk of Steve Wright. So he gets a contract extension announced by Adrian Wojnarowski just before the game. 2-year, $35 million extension, so the $17.5 million per season makes him the highest earning coach per annum in NBA history, which I think is well-deserved just based on how salaries are going, not only for players, but obviously coaches now as well. We saw what Greg Popovich got in the offseason. We saw what Monty Williams got in the offseason, which is quite funny. I actually came across like a thread on Twitter earlier today where Pistons fans were kind of saying that Monty Williams was trying to get himself fired, because obviously if you get fired, you'd get the payout on your contract kind of thing. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But Steve, I think, well-deserved to an extent. And I actually wanted to talk about Steve as well, because I had a person on YouTube ask me actually what I thought on Steve so far this season and some of his decisions, obviously. So I'll read out this comment on YouTube and then get into it. So this is from, I think, John McCurleen 7158. Apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly. So they've said, last year and into this season, it's been a lot of let Kuminga play, and now forget Saric and Loon, TJD should be starting. I'm in agreement with the Kuminga and TJD chants. Underlying these, though, have been a continual narrative that it's Steve Kerr's fault, that he's really not a great coach, that he's ridden on Steph's coattails, been slow to make the moves this season to get the team to click. I'd be really interested to know what you think about Steve Kerr I'd be really interested to know what you think about Steve Kerr versus the thrashing he's been getting over here. Thanks, mate. Appreciate that comment, and I wanted to get to it because that was a couple episodes ago and I didn't get to it last episode, so I apologize. But it's kind of good now that Steve has got the contract extension and we can kind of bring that into it. So I've been critical of him this season, as a lot of Warrior fans have been, and I think rightfully so. I could never be more critical, I don't think, than that game against Denver. It was January 5, where JK played well and then just inexplicably didn't play for the last 18 minutes of that game. That was one of the worst coaching decisions, and I think I said at the time, one of the worst coaching decisions I've ever seen in my life in any sport. And I promise you, I turned 27 tomorrow. I've been watching sports since I was in nappies, like since I can remember, and that was absolutely horrific. But at the same time, I want to actually give him some credit recently here for the way he has been open to adapting and changing, and the fact that JK is now a staple of not only the rotation, but the starting lineup and playing 28 to 30 plus minutes a game. And a lot of fans will say, oh, he doesn't deserve the credit because, this is what should have been happening from the start of the season. Maybe that's the case, but it could have been worse, right? He could have not played him at all or whatever, or never changed, and JK ends up getting traded and then he turns into an all-star elsewhere. Like, that could have happened. And so he took a while to come around to it, but it came just in the nick of time. Because I think if he'd actually gone much further than JK, probably would have definitely requested a trade. Obviously, we had that report after the Denver game I just spoke about, where JK or his team kind of went to The Athletic and were quite vocal and critical of Steve. But Steve's been able to turn it around, right? And I think that deserves some credit. His trust in pods is unbelievable, to the point where, imagine at the start of the season you said rookie Brandon Pajemski is going to be starting over Klay Thompson by the All-Star break. Can you imagine making that statement before the season? You would have been laughed out of here. Like, it would have been crazy to think about. And I suppose Steve haters could be saying, well, look at what Pods is doing. Look how he's impacting winning. He's got the best net rating on the team. Of course, he trusts him because he's one of their most impactful players to winning. Of course he's playing him. But I think that the trust, again, and the faith that Steve's shown in BP, again, deserves some praise. And I also, I want to be sympathetic to Steve. And this is the big thing, and this is why I think some fans struggle with, is this roster, and it's going to present more issues going forward, but this roster doesn't help him in any way because it is deep. It is deep. And it's the same issues from early in the season where you're like, all right, Steph and Draymond are really, they're your top two guys. And then everything down from that is an absolute dog's breakfast of your third best player and your 11th best player. I mean, your 11th best player could be better than your third best player on any given night, kind of thing. And then you got everyone in between, and it's absolute nightmare for a coach. And having full availability, I think, is often a blessing for teams, no doubt, but it can often be a curse. If you've just got 12 guys who you're how can I trust in what I'm doing here? How can I put different lineups and rotations out on the floor that are going to work with so many options that I have at my disposal? And again, sometimes that can be a blessing, but I honestly think it's a curse. And I think that's probably going to be the Warriors' biggest issue over the remainder of the season. CP3 is coming back here. What is Steve going to do with the rotation? Because they have got 12 guys that can play, right? They've got a 13th in Lester Quinones who's played in the last 11 games, and they've gone 9-2 in their last 11 games. Lester's contributing. They've got Guy Santos, who randomly closed a game over Clay in Brooklyn a couple of weeks back, who is only playing garbage time recently, but still looks okay. For every guy on the roster can theoretically play. And so I have some sympathy here for Steve and the challenges that he faces with trying to get the rotations right and trying different combinations and lineups. I think it's an absolute nightmare for him. I think it would cause so many headaches. You'd be up late at night thinking, like, what am I going to do here? And the same's going to happen when CP3 returns, because we're all talking about, how much is CP3 going to play? What's he going to do to BP's minutes? What could he do to JK's minutes? All this kind of stuff. And it's just, it's hard. It's hard. And I think that's worth acknowledging as fans, because I think it's so easy for us to sit on the couch, or even if you go to the games, whatever it may be, to be a couch critic and just to say, I would do this and I would do that, without actually putting yourself in the coach's shoes and some of the challenges that they actually face with what the roster presents. And so, as much as I am happy to be critical of Steve for some of the different things he has or hasn't done this season, I also want to praise him for some of the stuff that he's done. And I also want to have some sympathy for the position that he's in. So it's tough for him. And as I said, I think that's going to be the biggest issue for the Warriors going forward. I suppose the best news for them over recent weeks has been the fact they've got a starting five now that is clearly their best five, and that Steve's going to go to primarily. And then I guess a top six if you add Clay into that mix as well. So if you've got a top six, it's a lot easier to say, here's my top six, let me work out the rest, than the start of the season saying, okay, here's my top two in Steph and Draymond. Oh, Draymond just got himself suspended 5 games. Oh, he just got himself suspended 16 games. And then being like, I don't know what is going on with the rest? So yeah, sympathy for him. And I think with this extension, so the biggest thing obviously is that it aligns with Steph's contract. So he's got 2 years, $115 million remaining on his deal. And then Draymond as well, who I think has got $50 million over the next 2 years, and then a $27 million player option for the third season. So these 3 guys are all locked in now for the next 2 seasons beyond this one. And it makes me think Clay. Clay is the last one of the core 4 that have been around over a decade that needs to be locked in beyond this season. And I think if the franchise has their way, and I think to a degree, I think Clay should accept this as well, is like you sign him to a 2-year deal. And the Warriors reportedly offered him 2 years, $48 million prior to the season, which Clay, I guess rightfully at the time, rejected, because he would have seen Draymond get 4-year $100 and think, I need something closer than that. But with the way that Clay's playing so far this season, with the fact that he's moved back to the bench, I think if they revisited a deal in the offseason in free agency of a similar type, 2 year 48, is that a little bit overs for Clay maybe? Possibly, yeah. But I think in this current climate of the NBA, that's kind of what you would give him. I do think there has to be a little bit more maybe you pay because of what he means to the franchise. Like if you've got to pay an extra $5-10 million because he's Klay Thompson and because he's one of the top 5 players in franchise history, if you have to do that, just do it. Just do it. And so that's what I think the franchise would be looking for. Maybe Klay wants a 3rd-year player option on top of that to kind of give him a little bit more security moving forward. I don't know, but that's clearly like those 3 guys are now aligned, and we're just really waiting on Klay. And any thought that this season was kind of a last dance? Not really. Like you're going to have another 2 seasons after this with at least Steve, Dre, and Steve, unless something was to go completely haywire and that Draymond was to be traded, or Steph was to ask out or whatever. Like unless something goes completely off the rails, then like this is what they're locked into. And I think Steve deserves, like he's won 4 championships with these guys. I think he deserves the opportunity to continue with these guys. I think I find it hard to see Steve coaching a Warriors team without Steph Curry. And so I think all of this, Steve and Draymond and potentially Clay as well, it's all married to Steph and what he wants to do moving forward. And I'm not saying by any means that, these 3 guys plus Clay have only got, 2 years left. Like Steph could easily play another 5 years, I think, and play into his 40s. And so it might be a situation where those guys are still playing together in 4 or 5 years, and maybe Steve's still coaching. But I think the 2 years gives the franchise and those players and Steve as coach to reset at that point to see where they're at. And obviously, I think by that point, Clay has already transitioned into now a bench role. So by that point, you would think Steph might have taken a back seat. Draymond probably most definitely has taken a back seat. And you got guys like JK, BP, who can hopefully continue to step up into even bigger, greater roles. Because that's the dream, isn't it? Like Brandon said the other day, I think at All-Star Weekend, about him wanting to take over Steph's responsibility and Steph's role in the future. And that's ultimately what you want. And I think it's funny how this whole 2 timeline plan has kind of been rejuvenated this season, with the fact that the offseason seemed to suggest that the Warriors wanted to move away from that. But the young guys have played that well to a point where Steve's had to trust them and show faith in them. And BP and JK are now starting caliber players, and TJD is coming into his own. Moses is a different situation altogether, which I just spoke about. But I think it's kind of ironic how it's been rejuvenated that way. And the hope is that, maybe JK and Brandon, develop into all-star level players, and that by the end of the next 2 seasons, with those trio of guys are contracted to, then maybe JK is the best player on your team, and Brandon's the second best player in the team, and Steph might be the third, and Draymond might be the 5th or 6th, and Clay might be the 7th or 8th. And you try and pick the eyes out of a 2 timeline plan where you can still be in at least legitimate playoff contention, if not championship contention, while those guys are kind of phasing out of the primes of their careers. So it's obviously very fascinating times, but at least as fans, we have the security of now, this is what it's going to be for at least the next 2 seasons, and then we'll kind of reevaluate from there. But I'll finish up the episode. Thank you to anyone who's got through to this point. Much appreciated. The sport has been fantastic. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow me on X/Twitter, POK252. That's at POK252. Follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Warriors have the Nuggets coming to Chase Center on Monday my time. Looking forward to that one. Do a podcast on Monday after that game, I would say. So, again, appreciate all the support, and I'm going to be off and enjoying my birthday tomorrow. But otherwise, guys, have an enjoyable rest of your weekend.